Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Lunch and Learn series. We are going to talk about a lot of COVID today. I know it's still an issue that we got on top of mind, so that will be discussed. And we also have some news on unemployment updates that we want to share with you. Today, just so you know, we're going to be taking questions throughout the presentation. So please be sure to post those. And when I get on that thing, be sure to post those in the chat feature, and once we get to that segment, we'll help you answer those, or we'll answer them at the end. Also, just so you know, we record everything. So today the recording will be live probably tomorrow, and I'll send everybody an email that shows the link to the video in case you missed anything today, or if you have to leave early. And you can also, the link that I send you will take us to our YouTube channel that actually has other recordings of previous webinars. So today our presenters are Mike Moore and Katherine Campbell from our Labor and Employment Department, and I want to welcome them today. And I think Mike is going to say a few words to get started.
Great, thanks Tabitha, and welcome to everybody. This is our second effort at the monthly webinars, and we really want them to be tied to what y'all want to hear about. So at the conclusion of today, if you'll email Tabitha if you have ideas for upcoming topics that you'd like to hear about, we want to be sensitive to that. Tabitha, as Tabitha said, please, if you come across, if something we say brings a question to mind, put your question in chat. There are no dumb questions, but sometimes people are a little sensitive about asking a question where everybody can see it. So if you have a question you want to ask and are a little sensitive about it, then either send it directly to me or to Katie, and we'll monitor that as we go through and try and answer those questions. So we're now almost exactly a year from the start of the pandemic. And Katie and I did, I don't know how many seminars like this last spring in April and May. And what we always said was, we're just flying by the seat of our pants like everybody else and trying to learn what's happening new all the time. And we got a nice little spell of everything seemed to be rocking along without a whole lot of change. And now we're back to flying by the seat of our pants. Everything seems to be changing quickly again, and so we're going to try and talk about a few things today that are impacting y'all going forward, and trying to make sure you can keep your businesses operational and don't take unnecessary risks. So we're going to start talking about the vaccine and some of the issues that are presented with vaccine. And so as a general rule, you are allowed to require your employees to get vaccinated, except if they have a disability and they request an accommodation for that disability to be exempt from the vaccine requirement, or if they say they cannot receive the vaccine because of a sincerely held religious belief. So in both of those cases, you have to make the jump, make the decision: is the accommodation they have requested reasonable? And there are a whole lot of things that go into that. Part of that, and that is every case by itself. There's no set rule there. But because for example, if you have a workforce that's only 50% vaccinated, then it's going to be kind of hard for you to say that you can't accommodate somebody's request that they be exempt from the vaccine. If, however, you have 99% of your employees who are vaccinated, you have a better chance of saying that accommodation is not reasonable. This analysis is going to change as we go forward in a number of ways, because of a number of things that are going on, and it will change because the availability of the vaccine will change and increase. I don't know hardly anybody who's requiring all their employees get vaccinated, because very few employers have the ability to do that anyway. So when we talk about the religion accommodation, the EEOC in the last 3 weeks, I think, issued the new guidance to clarify their issue on what a sincerely held religious belief is. And I've been doing this long enough. I always thought a sincerely held religious belief had to be related to a religion. And what the EEOC has said now is that it is not related necessarily to a religion. It is much broader. So, Tabitha, if you will go to the next slide. So, what this says is it can also be religious beliefs that are new or uncommon or not part of a formal church or sect, and it might only be subscribed to by a small number of people, and it may seem illogical or unreasonable to others. It need not be confined in either source or content to traditional concept of religion. It can be the person's, quote, own scheme of things, close quote. But it has to occupy a place in the life of the possessor parallel to that filled by God. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I know it's going to be a long time before we see what all those words really, really mean, because this opens the door for a whole lot of people. And I'm not judging, but for employment lawyers and employers, it opens the door for a whole lot of people to say, I can't do this or that, whether it be vaccine or anything else, because of my sincerely held religious belief. And it's going to be really kind of difficult to determine the parameters of all that as we go forward. As I say all the time, lots of lawyers are going to make lots of money trying to figure out what that means. All right, so it muddies the water, obviously. What about sincerely held beliefs that are not religious? What can you ask an employee? What can you not ask an employee? Usually you can't get much into an employee's religion. This is going to be one of those places where we're going to have to tiptoe to find out whether this is a belief that occupies a place in the life of its possessor parallel to that filled by God. That's just a difficult concept to me, because it's going to be different for everybody. Yeah, I don't have any good answers for y'all today on this. The best I can do is tell you, be careful when you have people who say they don't want to be vaccinated, because it is just a quagmire of problems, a minefield of problems, if you will. So it also says that the other part of this EEOC guidance says that a denial of a religious accommodation absent undue hardship is actionable even without doing something to the employee. The denial of the accommodation, Tabitha, one more. The denial of the accommodation is actionable even though nothing happens to the employee. They say where a work rule conflicts with an employee's religious belief, it necessarily alters the terms and conditions of the employment. So this goes way beyond what I've always thought about as the quote unquote religious accommodation part of the federal discrimination laws. Now, as far as undue hardship, it has to be more than a de minimis cost to the business, and courts have found undue hardship where it diminishes the efficiency of other jobs, or infringes on other employees' job rights or benefits, or impairs workplace safety. Now, 6 months, maybe 3 months from now, when vaccines are generally available to everybody, there's going to be a point at which an employer is going to say, my accommodation of your religious belief to avoid your vaccination is going to impair workplace safety, and it's going to infringe on the job rights or benefits of other people in the workplace who have been vaccinated. Or it's going to infringe on the rights of the public who may be coming into my business. I think that Katie and I laughed a couple of weeks ago because there was an article out of Great Britain where in certain businesses, people were going to be required to show their vaccination record in order to get in. I'm a big believer that at some point in time, restaurants are going to require a vaccination ID. Some restaurants are, in order to come in. And so that will, that employee wanting to have that religious accommodation to not be vaccinated will cause some difficulty there. But before I'll move on to Katie and the unemployment update, I do want to talk about the latest in the vaccine issue in Arkansas. There is a bill pending before the House Bill 1754, I believe. This was just filed, which says that employers cannot, it wants to say, excuse me, that employers cannot require employees to be vaccinated. It is hugely problematic and is being fought on a number of fronts. I'm hoping that it actually gets pulled down based upon some conversations that I've had with the folks that are sponsoring it, talking about the problems. But so there's you know a strange set of circumstance that gets normally business friendly legislators to propose limits on businesses, the same sort of thing that caused, I think, a lot of the anti-vaxxing effort, which I think influenced the EEOC's guidance that we just discussed. But I guess the bottom line with that, there's a whole lot of moving parts on vaccinations going forward. And, you know, I'm a big believer in people getting vaccinated and employers encouraging / requiring that. I got lucky and got called in because somebody didn't show up for theirs. And so I'm now fully vaccinated and proud of it. So I'll shut up for a minute and I'll let Katie Campbell start talking a little bit about some unemployment issues that have been coming up.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about unemployment and the changes that we have seen and will see in the unemployment space coming up. So a fairly big change to unemployment came just in the last week or so. On February 25th, the Department of Labor issued new guidance that says that unemployment benefits are now available to a new group of individuals. So typically, you become ineligible for benefits if you refuse an offer of employment while you are on benefits and looking for work. If you get a job offer and you turn it down, that would disqualify you. But on February 25th, the DOL said that new workers who refuse a job offer are eligible for benefits if they turn down that job because the new employer doesn't offer the proper COVID protections. So this would only apply to somebody who was currently receiving unemployment benefits and they became disqualified by turning down a job because of the employer not providing COVID protections. The guidance says that this would include things like not requiring face mask wearing, physical, social distancing measures, the provision of PPE, and those sorts of things. This would put these individuals onto the PUA system. So they still would be disqualified from the state unemployment, but they would be on the pandemic unassistance program, which started back in March. And this would make them eligible for that retroactively. So going back to the time that they would have been disqualified from that. The guidance provides a few examples on who this would cover. So for example, an individual who was laid off in June of 2020 and began receiving state benefits and then was called back to work in October, that employee turned down the job offer to come back to work because their employer was not following the local mask mandate. So that individual had been disqualified from state benefits, but they are now eligible under this new guidance for PUA dating back to October. So this will really open up unemployment benefits to a new group of individuals. So the guidance that I just discussed, it does not apply to somebody who quits their job because they believe that their workplace is unsafe. It would only cover those who turn down a job offer. But just recently, the Arkansas Court of Appeals, oh, Tabitha, if you can go back to that slide that you were just on. The Arkansas Court of Appeals in the Keener case, it did discuss what would happen if an employee quits their job because they believe that their workplace is unsafe. So in this case, an employee who worked for a car dealership in Arkansas, she quit her job because she had two people that she was interacting with a lot at home. I think she had a son who was high risk and also an in-law who was high risk. And she said that her employer was not following the COVID protocols. And she didn't feel safe working there and having to interact with her son and father-in-law who had these high risk conditions. And so she quit her job. The Department of Workforce Services and the Board of Review actually said that she was disqualified because she had quit, but the Court of Appeals overturned that decision and they held that she was in fact qualified for benefits and that she had good cause for quitting. So typically, if you quit your job, you are not entitled to benefits, as you know, unless you have good cause. And so here, the Court of Appeals has said that you do have good cause for quitting if you can show that your employer is not following the COVID related rules and you have folks at home who would be higher risk. So in this case, she had not presented any evidence that there was a direct exposure to COVID, but she just said that they weren't following the protocols. And I think it's important too, in that case, it was mostly that the employer just didn't come forward with evidence that they were following the protocols. So it says, it is clear that there was an actual and valid risk that her employment could potentially expose her family to the deadly virus. It's not a matter that she failed to present evidence of a positive test. The validity of her concern is not dependent on actual exposure, but of the risk of exposure. So the court held, given the vulnerability of her family and the lack of precautions taken by her employer, her reaction was not unreasonable. And so the court held that she was entitled to unemployment benefits in that circumstance. I think that this case is fairly limited to the facts of her having family at home that was vulnerable and the fact that the employer didn't come forward with any evidence that they were following the CDC and DHS guidelines. But I think it shows a willingness on the part of the courts to take an employee-friendly view on these COVID-related precautions. And it emphasizes that employers do need to do all that they can in this space to follow guidance to avoid these unemployment claims, which I think Mike is going to address.
Yeah. Let me chime in for just a second, because what we're talking about is the unemployment context. Tabitha, if you could just drop back one, is that this is also the kind of thing that's involved in an ADA claim of somebody with a high risk in a high risk category that doesn't want to come to work, and the way we accommodate that is by saying we're doing all of the necessary things to protect you. I was in a conference yesterday with folks from DWS, and they are, I think they said they have 94,000 claims that may be affected by this ruling. And so what they're having to do is to go back and see this ruling or the PUA guidance on not returning to work. And so what they're doing is going back and instructing the appeals tribunal people and the agency determination people to make a record of what efforts that there are. So if you are an employer and you get an unemployment claim and it has to do with an employee saying, I was scared to work, then you need to say, we have the signs, We enforce social distancing. We enforce mask wearing in common areas. We take whatever precautions you take that you can add into that. And that way you don't have that barren record that they had in that in the Keener case. It doesn't take a whole lot, but it does take something.
Yeah, that's a good point. In the Keener case, there was no record made by the employer at all of what they were doing. So, so there's nothing that the Court of Appeals could rely on. So I think it's important to obviously take those precautions, but also to make the record, like you said. The next topic we'll talk about quickly is the tax relief that has been provided recently on the unemployment front. So there was an executive order passed at the end of last year that holds employers harmless for unemployment taxes that would have been paid in the second quarter of 2020. So in this executive order, Governor Hutchinson provided that in determining the employer's contribution rate that would have started this January, the chargeable benefits from April through June of 2020 are not included. So that really covers the bulk of the layoffs and the unemployment claims during the COVID crisis and holds employers harmless for those going forward this year. The executive order also provides assistance for reimbursing employers, so mostly your nonprofits, and it relieves them from reimbursing benefits that they paid from April 1st to June 30th of 2020. We do expect further guidance from DWS on this, so we will follow up and keep you informed about that. There is also a Senate bill, SB 236, that's being considered that would exempt Arkansas residents who received unemployment benefits from having to pay state income taxes on that. And that is, I think, awaiting the governor's signature. So we will keep you updated on that as well. Finally, on the unemployment front, just wanted to quickly update on federal legislation that is being considered. As you've all probably seen in the news, Congress is debating another stimulus package. This would include more unemployment aid. As a refresher, we had the CARES Act that was passed last March, and that went through December 31st. And then you had the Economic Aid Act passed in December, which carried forward the CARES Act unemployment provisions through March 14th. So at this point, many of the CARES Act unemployment provisions are set to expire on March 14th. The House version of the bill does extend most of these unemployment benefits that we've seen over the last year, and the Senate is considering the bill now. So just to hit the highlights of the House bill, which are possibly subject to change given the Senate's considering it now, but I think these are pretty much, in the Senate version as well. So it would extend unemployment benefits from that March 14th deadline to August 29th. It extends the PUA system, or the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, again through August 29th. That is the program that covers anybody who doesn't traditionally fall under the state program. So your gig workers, your independent contractors, anybody who's been disqualified under the state system. And importantly, it also increases unemployment aid by $400 a week. So anybody who's receiving unemployment under the state system would get an extra $400 supplement, which, as we have seen for the last year or so, does create issues for employers, especially in places like Arkansas, where an extra $400 a week is a lot. So that is being considered by the Senate, and something that we'll follow and keep you updated on. The final topic that we wanted to touch on today is some new Osha guidance that has come out. So on January 29th, Osha published updated guidance for employers about how to handle COVID in the workplace. Important thing to note here is that these are not new rules or regulations, and it's not intended to create new legal obligations, but it is guidance for employers. And as we've said, really for the last year or so, these are the guideposts that employers have to follow to show that they are doing all that they can to create a safe work environment. So, it helps minimize liability going forward if you can say that you followed these guidelines. It does not apply to healthcare or emergency responders in those work settings. So the key in this new OSHA guidance, it really is emphasizing education and including employees in the development of a COVID-19 response and prevention program. And there's 16 action items in the guidance, and we can circulate that to everybody on the group in here, so we don't go through each one of these, but it really ranges from assigning a workplace coordinator to performing a hazard assessment and educating employees. Many of these things are considered common sense, and they're things that we've been talking about since last March, but I think some are less obvious than some of the other common sense ones, so worth touching on. There's a strong emphasis in the guidance on masks. It really talks about employers providing and requiring masks for employees, especially those who are interfacing with customers, requiring customers to wear masks that would be interacting with their employees. So there's a strong emphasis on masks. There's also a strong emphasis on education. Tabitha, can you go to the next slide? It's about establishing, educating workers on the precautions. And so not only requiring social distancing and wearing masks, but explaining why that's important and how to know when you've been exposed or symptoms of COVID-19 and precautions that can help combat or at least mitigate the risk of COVID-19. And then on the last slide, it just shows some of the highlights from those 16 points that OSHA is recommending. And like I said, these are all recommendations, not requirements, but good best practices. So remove from the workplace anybody who is COVID positive or potentially infected, following CDC guidelines for when to quarantine and when to bring someone back from quarantine, how to implement physical distancing in communal work areas, and when and how to install barriers for physical distancing, use of PPE, and improve ventilation. So it's just something else to be aware of, is that there is OSHA guidance out there about how to handle COVID in the workplace, which is something that I think that we were looking for probably last March, and so we've gotten it now, and so it's something that's helpful moving forward.
Yeah, and I think Tabitha, if you'll back up just one or maybe two, having that workplace coordinator, as they say, is the number one suggestion in the OSHA rules. I think most of us have somebody that's the point person for COVID control, but having that person who's got a step by step. We've looked at this, we've done this, we've examined how we can do things. For example, the first week of COVID, we put a trash can on the floor in our restrooms next to the door, where somebody can grab a paper towel, open the door, and throw their paper towel in the trash can. That doesn't seem like much, but there are tons of things like that you can do. And if you have somebody who's the point person, you want that listing of here's what we have done to make our workplace safer, because that insulates you on the unemployment claims, it insulates you on ADA claims, it insulates you on some religious accommodation claims, and puts you in a better position. I think Katie and I were talking about it before we got started. A lot of the questions in the next week or two or three are going to be, well, what about the fact that the governor has relaxed the mandates and has done away prospectively with the mask mandate, apparently at the end of the month, if things don't get worse, and what do we do? And for example, I know a lot of restaurants that have said, we're not going to open completely yet, we're going to wait a little longer. And that's that is a business decision everybody has to make. I believe that there are some substantial risks in reopening and ignoring all of the things that the OSHA is suggesting. So we got some questions here. Do we know if the FFICR, as I call it, will be extended? And as Kim Lynn pointed out, hi Kim, the emergency paid sick leave was extended voluntarily through 3/31. I don't know that we have any idea whether it's going to get extended. That will all depend on how the new stimulus bill washes out over the next couple of weeks. Katie,
Yeah.
you got any other thoughts on that one?
No, I agree with what you were saying. It has not been in the House bill that's being considered. There's some talk about extending paid leave to federal workers, but based on just what I've seen debated in the Senate and House bill, I don't think there's much appetite for extending that further.
Clarify if the DWS benefits paid in 2020 are also being considered for exemption. It depends on which exemption you're talking about. My belief is that DWS intends to exempt benefit payments after July 1, 20 from experience rating in 1/1/22, if I've got those dates right. They are trying to make sure that all of the unemployment benefits related to COVID are not counted against employers.
Yeah, and then I think to address that second question, it's my understanding that right now unemployment benefits are just being considered exempt from state income tax and not federal income tax.
Yeah, okay. CARES, the CARES Act benefits, the unemployment benefits, PUA, I think is what you're talking about, Bernadette. And those are exempt from employers' experience rating and exempt from state income tax.
Yeah.
Those are state benefits that are federally funded.
Mm-hmm.
We got anybody else with any questions or experiences? I always like it when people tell us something that's been going on, because that sometimes can get us to have a great discussion about that'll help somebody else. If we don't require all employees to be vaccinated, can we ask them to provide us with a copy of their vaccination cards so that we know who has protection? Yes. My little vaccination card.
Yeah.
I'll have it laminated so I can carry it into restaurants in 6 months when they're requiring everybody to have their vaccination record. And of course, I mean, for any businesses that have any substantial forward-facing invitee customers coming in, you know, there's a question you have to ask: is are we going to require anybody that comes on our premises to have a vaccination? And at some point, that might be a reasonable accommodation. I love people who are as distrusting of some people as I am. A question: will the Department of Health provide an official vaccination card? That card could easily be forged. I don't think they're going to go to that trouble.
Yeah. We have another question.
But I could get it. We could start a heck of a business.
Fake IDs will take on a new meaning. Yeah.
Right. Tabitha, don't, no, I'm just kidding. Somebody may do that though, at some point in time. And you're absolutely right. That could easily be forwarded. We can make copies of that on cardstock and go to town. Hopefully we won't get to that point.
There's another one. It says, what are your thoughts on, instead of requiring vaccines, providing some type of incentive to do so? And that's something that I've seen a lot of people doing, as opposed to requiring it, incentivizing it through an additional paid time off, or, you know, some other incentive like that.
Yeah, there's a caveat there that when I started recommending that, I didn't know, and one of our partners talked about that might be an ERISA wellness plan that we got to be careful about. There you go. There's the potential legal pitfalls be involved with incentives. I'm a big believer in saying, if you need to take time off to go get your shot, go take your time off to do it. And I think that encouraging is a big deal. We are big around here of being proud of those of us who have gotten lucky enough to be vaccinated. And I had a young lawyer today that said, I got to take off to go get vaccinated. And I said, go. I didn't ask any questions. I just said, go. But I agree, there are some potential pitfalls with incentives, and I would want to be careful about how far I went on that.
Yeah. And the other thing is, if you're offering cash incentives, you would need to consider that as an FLSA, you know, into your overtime calculation as well. Yeah.
Kim, what I think probably the question is, please continue on speaking on ERISA issues, and maybe what we need to do for one of our upcoming lunch and learns is to get one of our partners that is an ERISA expert to come on. And I know enough to get in trouble and ask questions sometimes, but that's about it. But that's what's great about being in a firm, that I got experts in everything in the world to ask about. The question about, if you require an employee to get the shot and they have an adverse reaction, can the company be held responsible? I don't believe so.
Yeah. And as Dr. Joe told us when we were on with him last time, the number of adverse reactions has just been so small that, especially in comparison to certain other shots, that it's a lower risk.
Yeah, and so I think last time we got together, we talked about there's a video by one of the officials of the state health department talking about how safe the vaccines are, and if you're a member of the state chamber, and actually that their weekly talk today bumped up against us. I didn't realize it until it was too late, but the state chamber does a webinar with the municipal league, and they have the Department of Health on there every week, I believe, or at least every 2 weeks, with a COVID update. And it's a great resource to see what's going on, what the trends are, and to find out more about the vaccinations. Question is, can an employer require the vaccines when the vaccines are considered experimental in nature, emergency use authorization? Absolutely. Unless House Bill 1547 comes into law, an employer can require that. And you know, based upon my understanding, that's a lot of that experimental in nature argument is the one that's being used for that act, for that bill. And I think the FDA has determined it's safe enough to authorize, and so an employer can require it. So here's a question. We're considering requiring the vaccine on a per job basis because some artists that come on a premises are requiring that the backstage crew be vaccinated or they won't present on our stage. Hell, right now, I can't imagine that you got people working on a backstage crew that would be high enough on the pecking order to have gotten vaccinated. I wouldn't think you could not, based upon what rules, you couldn't get those people vaccinated. However, at the appropriate time, I think you could do that.
Yeah, I agree.
You could say anybody who is going to be coming in contact with the public has to be vaccinated.
Right. I think as long as it's tied to a legitimate reason, that makes sense.
Right. Just be able to articulate the business reason for whatever you're doing, because that allows you to at least start getting over the hurdle of undue burden if you have an accommodation issue.
Right.
Y'all got great questions. What I ask people when they talk about the fear of the vaccine is, what's the science behind your fear? Is there anything the FDA says, or the CDC says, or the Department of Health says that makes you fearful for getting the vaccination for whatever situation you got? And it's my belief that if somebody doesn't have some science behind their desire to be exempt, then they got a real tough time getting past it. Getting past my desire to have everybody vaccinated. Anybody else? Questions? Going once? Going twice? All right, you know how to get a hold of us if you got other questions, and be happy to answer them anytime. I do really encourage y'all, if you got topics going forward that you'd like us to cover next time, we're always willing to do that. This is meant to be for y'all. This is meant to be current and what's going on. I think today we hit some things that are like popping immediately, and that's the way we're going to try and do this. So if you got something that you need, that you need, that you think would be good for the group, then shoot it to us, and we'll make sure to put it in the mix. All right.
Thanks, guys.
Good to see smiling faces and names here. Thank you all for coming a bunch, and hope to see y'all next month.